Is language innate? We all know what innate means, correct? Is language innate? Are you born with the capacity of language to be able to acquire language? Or is it something you learn along the way?
It's something you learn along the way.
Really? And what separates us from, say, like these guys? Can they learn it along the way too?
I mean, even with people like Mexico, everyone has a different dialect, a different language. Not everybody can pick up on it, not everybody can speak it.
But it's still a language.
Right.
So a universal language, right? The concept, the idea of language, is it innate? We all have to learn how to speak at some point and understand and communicate. It's that, where does that come from? Right? What separates us from these guys? In terms of, how come they can't speak English? How come they can't speak Spanish? How come they can't learn to speak Spanish? What do we think? Just throw some ideas out there. Don't have to be right or wrong, it's just theoretical questions. You know, what do you think? Right? Because most of the stuff is unanswered. We just have the best of our ideas of what we think is theoretical, right? Is it innate, or is it just like, hey, human beings just have the, I mean, what do you want to call it? Just the ability to be able to understand in this spoken word, these written words, these sign language. Anyone?
Brain capacity, possibly.
Right, okay, we'll start there. There's something different with our brain structure, right? In these guys right here. There's something different. But they have their own language, means can they communicate with each other?
Yeah.
Yes, right? And whatever language they have, concept of language. We have our own, which means that we are born with something that allows us to be able at some point to communicate. Now there's how many languages around the world? I think around 7,000 or so. It doesn't matter how many. Because we could learn those too, right? Yes?
Well, there's studies that say that dolphins understand English to a certain extent.
Correct. That they can understand certain speech patterns of English or sounds or verbal cues, like, or hand signals. You remember what it said?
I read it a long time ago.
Yeah. From my understanding, I think they can understand both. They can understand sounds in enough time they can understand a certain word, right? The words transfer in sound waves, they can understand that pattern of sound waves coming to their ear. But language is a remarkable thing because your thoughts are part of language, right? You think in English, most of you, right? And if you have a second language, maybe you think in that as well too. This one's just an introduction to show the cognitive skills of other animals, right? This guy right here, at some point you start collecting stones, and you start putting stones over in the corner where he will like sleep, right? And later on, when the other chips would come through, he would use those stones to fight and combat. Which means that a lot of animals are a lot more intelligent than we want to give them credit for, right? Which means he has the capacity to organize, to be strategic, to be able to have order to fight. This one right here, I think this is a crow. He saw that he can use stones to do what? This cylinder. What do you use it for?
Raise the water.
Yeah, raise the water level, right? There's a worm in there somewhere. He can't get to the worm because his beak is not long enough. But he has the capacity to understand, like, hey, if I drop stones in here, I can raise the water level, the worm will come up and I'll be able to eat it, right? So these animals should not be taken for granted, in terms of their level of intelligence, but their level of intelligence is different than ours, right? Because we define intelligence, because we are not them. So non-human animals, including all mammals and birds, have neural networks that generate consciousness. So they're highly aware of what's going on. We are not the only species that have consciousness, that make these observations and ponders things. So using concepts and numbers, they display insight, transmitting culture, and other cognitive skills. They have culture as well as we do. Language structure, we have language as a whole, we have phonemes, we have morphemes, we have grammar, we have semantics, we have syntax. We know what these things are? Which is the correct one to use in English?
First one.
First one, okay. What is the correct one to use in Spanish? Who speaks Spanish? Anybody? Come on, Slice. What would it be like, Gato Negro? Right? Okay. Right, so words are transformative depending on the language, right? But we use the same words, they're just used in different manners, right? Or we can say this, what does that mean? What does that mean? It doesn't mean anything, right? You're like, does not compute, right? That's syntax. Means the order of words, right? We have to order words in a certain way for it to make sense to us, else it doesn't make sense, right? We're still using real words here, but we haven't organized the words within any way for it to make sense to anyone, right? Grammar, we're just using a system to make sense, right? Use an entire system to convey words within phrases, within sentences, semantics. Syntax is the order, semantics is how we use those words within an order. Phoneme and morpheme, those are just individual units. Phoneme can mean individual units of sounds, right? Part of a word, ch, these kind of sounds that we have phonetically, which are natural. Morpheme would be sort of whole words, right? A word that can be used in some way to make meaning within using with other words. So that's the beginning of language. Anyone familiar with Noah Chomsky? Anyone ever heard of him? He's pretty popular. He's kind of like a philosopher, but he studied linguistics, but he's more of like a political, what would you call like a public intellectual? Kind of think of Jordan Peterson. You guys familiar with Jordan Peterson? Anybody? Jordan Peterson? Political, I would say like a public intellectual, a guy who goes out and speaks on different topics about politics, but he's an intellectual, he used to be a linguist. And very popular, probably one of the most popular linguists of all time. And he established that it's an unlearned human trait, and there is a universal grammar. Going back, that there's something inside of us that gives us the capacity to have grammar, the capacity to have language, the capacity to understand language, right? It doesn't mean we need to even be taught it. You don't even need to be taught this stuff. Which, if you observe babies, right? Let's say 4 months and younger, and they'll make the same sounds, and they make these sounds universal. They make the same sounds in Korea, same sounds in Papua New Guinea, same sounds anywhere in Africa, same sounds here in the United States. Which would be like, would be like, ba, little sounds. The sounds are universal, right? So that clearly shows that there's something there. That there's something we have innately that is universal. Doesn't matter where you were born. Doesn't matter who the parents are. Those are the beginnings of language. That is nature itself. World languages are more structurally diverse than the universal grammar system. Grammar is learned from the distinct patterns heard. So grammar comes from actual learning, right? Different distinct patterns that we hear from others. But the ability is natural, it's innate. Brought together as on the desert island, language and thought. This one just refers to sign language. How even if you lose verbal skills, if you lose any sort of other way other than just using signals, right? That no matter what, communication will be adaptable. Just so you know to that, you'll communicate. Receptive language, talking here about babies. Recognition of difference in speech sounds, preference for a face sound match. So babies tend to pay attention and observe to the different sounds you're making. Maybe they will try to emulate sort of very simple sounds such as mama, dada, those sorts of things. So they're being receptive to see the different patterns within the speech. And a preference for a face sound match, which is typically why mama and dada are like the first words. Because usually those are the first two people around. Or have the most interaction with the child. Productive language. So we go through 4 stages here. Babbling, which is ba, all these things. 1 word stages, 2 word stages, and then telegraphic. And then we'll talk here with the graph. So at 4 months, babbles many speech sounds, right? Agu, agu. 10 months, babbling resembles household language. Mama, right? So mama's repeated several times in the household. At 10 months, we begin to recognize that when we start to speak that. At a year, 1 word speech, kitty or doggy, simple things like that. 2 years, 2 word speech, such as get ball, which means sentences aren't fully structured yet, but we're able to convey at least 2 words to make sense of something. Get ball is the example here. Past 2 years of age, we have rapid development into complete sentences. So this here just shows you the progression from the earliest stages of life, how we develop our grammar and our language. It goes from parts of words, right? To still almost parts of words, to a full word, to 2 words. Now we got multiple words. And from there we begin to synthesize words to make sense and create a vast vocabulary for ourselves to express things. Critical periods in language development follows a sequence. Childhood represents a sensitive period for mastering certain language aspects. I think typically they say if past 7 years old, you'll have extreme difficulty learning a new language. So for children who are introduced to multiple languages, such as in Europe, I know when I was in Sweden, everybody spoke Italian, French, and German. Everybody. But that just shows you that from early stages on, that stuff will stick with you very easily. Now, an adult trying to go there and try to pick up German or Italian or French, it'll be extremely difficult for you. Because our natural processes have kind of went on in terms of mastering languages, right, from our earliest stages. So basically, it's good to learn stuff early, rather than late. It becomes extremely difficult. Prelingually deaf children born to hearing non-signing parents typically become linguistically stunted. Yeah, this one shows the language, right? The older the age of immigration, the poorer the mastery of the second language. Illustrating that people born here in the United States who come from a family that's from another culture that speaks multiple languages have a better mastery of the English language than those who've come here later. Meaning that even if someone here, let's just throw age at arrival, right? Native, 3 to 7, 8 to 10, 11 to 15, 17 to 30 to 39. It's showing mastery of the second language, right? Native, extremely high. The older you get, very poor. So even if you've come here at age 25 and now you're 50 years old, guess what? You may still talk in broken English. Right? You've been here for 30 years, why are you still talking broken English? Because linguistically, it's very hard for us to pick up the second language as we get older, to master it. So if you ever travel places here in the United States and you're like, oh man, there's a lot of broken English spoken here, it's probably because people have come in later on in life, right, as opposed to being actually born to that place. The brain divides mental functions into sub-functions to process language, which parallel processing occurs. Damage to any several cortical areas can produce aphasia, or lessening your ability to understand language and grammar and to communicate properly because it's a form of brain damage. Two areas, Broca's area and Vernon's area, but we don't really need to focus on that. Do other species have languages? Some animals display basic language processing. Ape vocabularies are limited. They typically use apes when we're talking about these things, and chimpanzees and other primates. Learning may be by mimicry, not language. Perceptual sets are not clearly seen, which means there's some skepticism there, right? Although primates can mimic things that human beings are doing in the laboratory, right? Typically mimic, doesn't mean that there's a full understanding of what's going on, and that they can even go beyond what they're being trained to mimic. Yeah, so rules of syntax are not evident with these primates, and perceptual sets are not clearly seen. Of course, language has influence on the way we think. Words define mental categories. What matters more in our world? Words or actions? What's more impactful from your point of view in this society today, words or actions?
Actions.
Really? Even on the internet? What's more influential?
Both.
How so?
because, I mean, like on the internet, you can portray one thing, but you still gotta show, like, if you really did it or not. Some people just believe words, but some people like to actually see what you got and how you did it.
Yeah, which means it's probably divided, right?
Yeah.
Some people,
It's almost like saying all bark, no bite.
yeah. But we can say that it's very impactful, just words, right? We can just put an image up and put a lot of words conveying what we can believe to be a truth, a fact, and how many people will believe that. Right? And carry it on and spread it on to the next person, and we got a whole bunch of people believing something without any action whatsoever. So words are impactful, right? Politicians know this, CEOs know this, creative types know this. Think of music, right? Is music words or is music action? Music's just words, but how impactful is music to you? How much does music impact you, inspire you, make you actually have to do something? So words are extremely powerful. Words perceive differences grow and change with different assigned names, such as colors. Different personality profiles exist in bilingual individuals, bilingual advantage. So now we get to the part I think we talked about last class, we dealt with intelligence, but we'll kind of reiterate here. Intelligence, ability to learn from experience, solve problems, and use knowledge, we talked about that. General intelligence, we talked about that. We talked about multiple intelligence, how you could be intelligent in many different fields, but there's really not a real general intelligence that should be gone by. Some criticisms of multiple intelligence theories are factor analysis confirms the existence of general intelligence, which I disagree with. Emotional intelligence. What is emotional intelligence?
Being aware of how you feel
How you feel,
and how others feel.
and how does that occur?
Understanding reactions and facial expressions.
So is that understanding reactions?
Yeah.
Who here feels that they're emotionally intelligent?
Can you explain it a little more?
Do you feel that you perceive others' emotions so that you react properly or constructively or productively towards others?
Yeah.
You do? Is emotional intelligence part of overall intelligence? Let's say we will acknowledge general intelligence, right? We'll call it IQ. Is emotional intelligence important to being overall intelligent? Right? You need to understand others in order for you to understand yourself to operate productively in the world. So yes, right? It needs to be important. What other source of importance, let's say, what other source of intelligence can we identify that we have out in society? What would be important in society besides emotional? Right, because emotional deals with individual. What would deal with groups? Right, we got something called cultural intelligence. What do we think cultural intelligence is?
You just said that one time.
What's that?
Can you repeat what you just asked?
What do we think cultural intelligence is?
Part of it is having street smarts.
That could be it. The streets are cultural, right?
Yeah.
Understanding groups, right? Having acknowledged what's the value systems of others, what's important to others, why it is important to them, how do they make meaning? And the values that they have. How do groups of people make meaning? How do cultures make meaning? Right? How do societies make meaning? Because our meanings are different than others as soon as we cross the border, right? As soon as we go somewhere else around the world, they have a different set of values, a different set of meanings. Which means if we're not perceptive or have any acknowledgement or produce any skill set to understand them, then it means we're very, very limited. The limitations will increase the intelligence in that field. So just because you have this, does not mean you have this, does not mean you have that. Which means that it is multi-factor. Just because you're highly intelligent, went to Harvard, graduated, got a PhD, the whole thing, you could be extremely ignorant emotionally. You'd be extremely ignorant culturally, right? You have very low cultural intelligence, very low emotional intelligence. That your intelligence is all about books and concepts and theories, and when it comes to dealing with other people, no, horrible. Which is not advantageous throughout the process of life, right? That means you're gonna restrict yourself with the people you engage with, you'll be extremely biased, you'll have a lack of understanding of why people do things the way they do, why they value things the way they value. And you'll be very, very limited. Who's here ever taken we talked about IQ test? You said you took one? You feel like it was accurate when you got your results?
I was never told my results.
Oh yeah, you told me, you took it as a kid, right?
Yeah.
Very little. Anyone else ever took an IQ test? What about how was that experience? What did it conclude?
I didn't feel like very accurate.
You felt like you were smarter than what the test.
No, I felt like I was dumber than the
So the results were too gracious, is what you're saying. Okay. Anyone else? What about SAT, ACT? Anybody feel that those were accurate in their level of intelligence when they took it? Was that? It was a waste of time?
Yep, definitely.
Definitely ways.
I mean, realistically, a piece of paper isn't gonna tell you how
Smart you are.
Exactly.
Very good, excellent point, excellent point. What can it tell you though? Is there any value to it whatsoever?
No, I feel like it just stresses you out.
It definitely just, especially when it's a 4-hour test.
Because some people have test anxiety, right?
Yeah.
Or exam anxiety, which means that even if you're the smartest person in the world, and now you're stressed out, you're probably gonna screw up on a lot of things, right? Yes?
If you're really good at taking tests like that, then it'll tell you, like, you get a really good score, and you didn't know most of the information.
Or you're saying that it'll tell you if you're just good at taking tests?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So our tests, they should be done with, or there's still some validity in them?
I mean, some of those should be.
Yeah, it should be cut out of the curriculum.
I think those that create it and those who actually grade them don't take into consideration that those tests can make or break someone's opportunity to get a higher education.
Yeah.
Cause most schools do look at that and turn you down if you don't qualify with the grade or the score that they want. When in reality, it could just be that some people just don't care to take a test, or like you said, they get very anxious taking it.
Right, the test could be biased. What it could be biased to? It could be biased to the culture. It could be biased to the language. Right? It could be biased to a lot of things. It's not taking into account a lot of the differentiations of people. So the test may be good for some, may be horrible for others. So what do we get from that? I don't know. We just get that people know how to follow the rules, know how to study to follow the rules of this test. And by doing that, maybe we learn them to be sort of militaristic. We can train these people, right? We can teach these people. So maybe that's what they're trying to grasp at. But in terms of saying how smart somebody is, that's a very vague concept. I remember I had to take a test for, anyone ever heard of Mensa? No?
No.
Mensa's like a group for like intellectuals, right? And supposedly it's like you're the, you know, the top 1% in the country or whatever taking the test. And I remember, I took the test like this was a long time ago. I was like a teenager or something like that. Yeah, and I got into Mensa. I was like, this can't be right, because the test is actually like a joke. It was actually like very oversimplified. But from then on, I was like, oh man, these standardized tests, they don't really do much for anything. So yeah, intelligence tests, assess mental aptitudes and compare them with those of others showing numerical scores, right? Okay, that's what they're stating here. Achievement tests intended to reflect what is learned, aptitude tests intended to predict the ability to learn some new skill. These may have some validity, I believe, right? You're intended to predict the ability to learn some new skill. You may have aptitude tests. But intelligence, that one, maybe toss out. Different tests they have in psychology, the Benets, those are all the intelligence tests you get, the IQ tests, which are parts of the Wechsler's and different versions and ways. We don't have to go through those. They're saying they can predict extremes of intelligence, low extremes, so intellectual disability would be apparent before the age of 18. That we could predict someone who has impairment. Obviously, you guys went to grammar school and high school, so you may have seen people who had been separated because of disability, right? Right, special education kids that need specialized education. Now, here's the other part, the criteria for diagnosis, intelligence test scores indicating performance lowest 3% of general population, or about 70 or below. I think 70 is the IQ test average, right? So if you get 70, you're pretty average. Anything above will be increasing in intelligence. So anything below 3% of that, you'll be indicated as sort of having an intellectual disability. From there, they have difficulty adapting to normal demands of independent living, conceptual, social, and practical demands of living independently, which means they'll always need some form of assistance in trying to navigate through society as they get older and older. High extreme of intelligence. high scoring children IQ of a 135, high level of education attained. Now let me ask you that, does education matter in terms of intelligence? Levels of education?
To a certain extent, not for everything in life.
So you getting a degree and getting your bachelor's, right? And then somebody say, hey, I got my GED. Would you perceive that there's any difference in intelligence?
On paper, yes, on pay sometimes. Although some people who don't even go to college are very successful.
Who here thinks having a degree makes them slightly more intelligent than not having a degree? No one? That is all relative. What about master's degree?
I mean, it might make you smarter in that field, but, oh, my bad, go ahead.
Now you got it.
I was like, it might make you smarter in that field, but overall, no, not necessarily.
What about PhD?
I mean, people take it more serious when you have a higher education, realistically.
So society values it, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't necessarily dictate any sort of intelligence, because intelligence is relative, right?
Right.
We just said it's broken up in different modes, right? Common sense, someone may not have common sense, but can solve all the trigonometry problems in the world, right? Or they may be emotionally ignorant, which you might say that sort of devalues their overall intelligence, right? Think of this, would you describe somebody's intelligence devalued if they were racist, but a genius?
No.
No?
It comes back to a cultural background, how they grew up, how they perceived life, how everything was deemed okay when it's really not.
But if we just established that parts of intelligence is emotional and cultural,
Sometimes you gotta separate the two. I mean, sometimes people work with jackasses who are really smart, so sometimes you just gotta let them be a jackass and know that they're gonna do good for the business.
who disagrees? Who thinks that, being a racist would devalue overall intelligence? What do we think? Or is that too controversial for you guys to answer? I would say it does, right? Because if you're quote unquote intelligent, right, general intelligent, you would be contemplative, right? You would contemplate the nuances of life, the world, people, how they organize, different cultures, languages, opportunities, economics, right? You would factor in all these things. You just say, hey, it's a pretty mixed up world. And to generalize entire groups of people would actually kind of be kind of ignorant. Yeah, it would be kind of kindergarten thought, you know, wouldn't be any real thought into that. But just think of that, right? Because we said cultural intelligence is extremely important, which means the most successful people have high level cultural intelligence. Why? They've been able to provide something that everybody wants, beyond what they look like or their social backgrounds. You think Steve Jobs with Apple wouldn't have created these superior products, thinking about what people need regardless of backgrounds, right? You think certain presidents wouldn't have won their primaries and general elections if they did not consider all these other different groups they have to appease to, right? You have to have high level of cultural intelligence to be successful, I would say, in this society particularly. So it matters. It matters. There's some value there. High math scores at age 13, top 1%, 1650. Levinsky's high math SAT scores at top 13. That would show high extreme intelligence. I think, I forget which one, I think it's the ACT, if you check the letter C, for every single answer. I think you get that a lot. So I'm not sure that the ACT, SATs really kind of establish any true intelligence. High verbal aptitude, 13 years old, professors or doctors at age 38. Oh, that's interesting. I guess they put me in that category. But intelligence across lifespan, before age 3, modest prediction of future aptitudes from casual observation intelligence tests. All these tests that children take, we can kind of predict or how intelligent they're gonna be a human being, as adults. So keep that in mind. If you're a relatively quote unquote smart kid growing up, you're probably gonna be a smart adult growing up, right? There's very little change in the amount that could actually be obtained, right? Which means that there's innate abilities to just kind of understand concepts and things in life. I'm not gonna hold you guys, I'll let you go.